welcome back to the Breaking Brad podcast. Today's episode is a really personal one for me. My son, Luca, who is 4.5 years old, love of my life, goofy, sweet, lovable. He has autism. And it's something that even as I say it out loud, I still have trouble saying. In fact, it was only a matter of the past few months that I really started reaching out to family and friends and just needing to say it. It's almost like the word felt like a relief to say it. In the beginning, it really didn't present in what you would call the traditional, I'll call it Western medicine description of autism. He spent the first year of his life in Los Angeles. He maybe saw 3 or 4 people from outside the home. We were living in complete lockdown. This was 2020 and 2021. And those people that he didn't interact with, they look like aliens, with face shields and masks on his face. So it wasn't like he was imprinting, normal communication patterns. So when he was almost 2 years old and he wasn't necessarily speaking that much, it wasn't alarming per se, because he wasn't presenting with any of the other symptoms that you might think about. He wasn't having trouble walking around. He was plenty strong. His core strength was good. He was deeply connected. I mean, this kid can beat anybody in a staring contest. But then it became 2.5, and then it became 3. And we decided that, we owe it to him. We love our son and we want to have him evaluated. And, we heard that term for the first time, autism. I kind of shut down when I heard that. I just thought, he's going to be on his own journey. He's going to do things on his own time. He'll be fine. He'll talk when he's going to talk. I mean, Morgan Freeman didn't talk till he was 9 years old, and he's the voice of God. So it's like a late speaker. Obviously can still have a pretty powerful voice. But thankfully, my wife did basically the opposite. I'm going to tell you, ChatGPT and the Swifties ain't got shit on an autism mom, pardon my language, because these people will dig deep and find and search, and they want to help their kids, not necessarily just or do things that they can to better their lives, better their experiences, increase their chances of developing in normal ways. And she found Greer. So Greer McGuinness is our guest today. And I will say that when we met her, and I'm sure that Greer can smile and snicker when I say this, I was a bit of a skeptic. I grew up in traditional Western medicine in my house. My dad's a cardiologist, sort of part of the old guard Eastern philosophies, and things like detox and words like that were sort of considered fringe medicine. And it's not that there was anything wrong with the way that I was thinking. It's just that's the way I was brought up. It's like you're brought up speaking Spanish, you're going to speak Spanish. You're brought up speaking English, you're going to speak English. I was just brought up thinking something's wrong, you go to this doctor, you take this pill, and then you're done. Greer took one look at Luca, told us her story, which I'm going to ask her to tell because it's inspiring and incredible and speaks to who she is as well as what she does. She recommended some tests for Luca to see if there were any other things going on. Things that no pediatrician, by the way, had ever suggested or evaluated. Things like testing his gut for mold. Things like looking for heavy metals in his system. Things like looking for inflammation markers. Exposures to things that I wasn't thinking about. And the results were, as a data guy who does like randomized clinical trials to get things through the FDA, these were indisputable results. This kid's levels were off the chart. He had mold toxins. He had sky-high levels of heavy metals in his system that just shouldn't be there. I mean, one of them was a rare earth metal that I can't even figure out how he could have been exposed to it. And that was, I think, one of the highest ones, interestingly enough. But his body was screaming to help, and he couldn't tell us. So for my wife, she actually described it as the biggest relief she's ever had, and sort of what you could call a backwards way of thinking. But I understand it because she wasn't just being given a label, she was being given a why. Why is something wrong? And the second you have a why is something wrong, you actually have the ability to theoretically do something about it. Same way you would do something about it for any family member or friend that had any condition, whether it be cancer, ALS, muscular dystrophy. I mean, heart disease, throw it out there. My wife wanted to make our son better, make his life better, give him a better chance of developing, in the way that, he could be, or in the way that he could do. And Greer is the person who gave us that clarity. And after working with her now for about a year, actually I think maybe even over a year, he's thriving. I mean, within 6 weeks of starting with Greer's program, it was indisputable. I mean, how much of a difference it was. Like, I went from skeptic to like cheerleader. I'm out there singing the praises and waving the flags and, pumping the pom-poms and looking up everything I can on inflammation and autism and what the heck else is going on. But I feel like everybody needs a chance to hear what Greer has to say, to hear about the work she does. And it's an unbelievable honor to have her here on a personal basis because she means so much to my family. But also, I want everybody who's listening or watching to not to necessarily take away fear or blame from this episode, but to maybe think of it as a way that we can evolve and maybe actually gain some hope. So Greer, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your story and who you are and what you do, I'd really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, thanks for having me. And yes, you were, I do get some dads on my calls. Sometimes, a lot of times it's just moms. And I remember you were sitting with Scrubs and I was like, oh no, I was like, he's in medical field. I know he's going to know like a lot about medical stuff. And that, I didn't know if you were going to be a skeptic, and you were definitely a skeptic at first, but I'm glad I converted you and I'm glad you're on our team. And as I was the same way. So I'm a registered dietitian by trade. I was Western medicine trained with nurses and doctors and everybody else, and I had a very straightforward way of thinking when it came to medicine, same as you did. And I always just thought I was trained the right way. This is what I was taught. I'm educated, I'm a higher educated person. Like I know this information. And when I had my son, being a first time mom, I didn't really know what to expect. And we were going through life fine. And I thought, again, I knew all the right things. I thought I was doing all the right steps. And my son regressed at around 19 months into autism. And I was devastated. I went to the pediatrician. I said, I don't know what happened, but he stopped. It was just in 1 week, he stopped talking, no more eye contact. He used to just light up and have, these funny moments. And he was just like such a comical kid. And it was like someone turned the light switch off on my kid. And I panicked and I went to the pediatrician, and she's like, okay, let's get early intervention and see. And so early intervention came out. We had to wait till he was exactly 2 years old at that time, because they had to, with the testing at 2 years old, they compare them to somewhat older children where they can get a better diagnosis. And so at 2 years old, he got a moderate autism diagnosis. And just like you, we didn't tell anybody. I don't think we were ashamed, but it just felt such like a stigma and just such gut punch of just like, what just happened? Like we were going through life. We were enjoying life. Like everything was fine. We had no concerns. And then we got a gut punch of, mass like our lives spun. And that's where I started getting involved into all the things I could do for him. I was doing all the therapies. I was doing OT, PT, ABA. I mean, our whole lives were just shoveling back and forth of going to all these different therapies and things like that. And I had a friend who was a crunchy mom nurse. Okay. And she never pushed. And I'll be forever grateful for her, because there are some moms that are very much in your face. Like, you should do this if your kid's autistic, and that can put somebody off very, very easily. And she ever so gently kind of left me some crumbs of things that I should look into and things that I should do. And I was like, oh, okay. Cause I figured, she's a nurse too. Like, if she knows some of this information. And I started diving deep into the research and I was like, "Oh man, like there's a lot out here." Like, why wasn't this told to me? Like I was like pulling up research studies after research studies and I decided to go back and get my master's in health science with a focus on epidemiology because I really wanted to dive more into the research of autism and things like that. And I remember I told my husband, I said, "Okay, listen, I have this idea. I have like these supplements I want to start our son on." And he looked at me like, "Okay." He's like, I said, "Listen, I've done my research. They're not going to harm him." Like, within 6 weeks, that kid started putting sentences together at 4.5 years old. And my husband looked at me and goes, "What did you do?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know what I did." Um, but it was pretty incredible. And that just was what catapulted me into this world and lifestyle, especially working with these families, is just I went I feel like I uncovered something, like, and the more research I got into, the more seminars and webinars I went to and meeting, some of the most amazing functional practitioners and getting published with some of the amazing practitioners like Dr. Fry was just incredible. And, realizing that if we can keep pushing this information and research out there, that more people like your wife and other families are going to find it and hopefully continue to help their kids.
I want to ask you some questions about the CDC report that came out this year in April of 25 that talked about the rise in autism rates in the US.
Yeah.
And the numbers, if I'm recalling them, we went from, what was it, 1 in 36 to 1 in 31 on that
I
report.
think it's 1 in 32.
Yeah,
1 in 32.
but it was a
Yeah.
big increase. But then it was really interesting that it was stratified across different states. California was,
So,
yeah. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead, please.
California is super high. California, New Jersey are usually the highest two states. But you also have to look at population. So obviously, certain states are going to be more populated than others. I think there's also a toxin component to them. After literally looking at thousands of toxin reports, I can honestly say, like, anyone on the East and West Coast, Californians, Texans, down south, Floridians, and up the East Coast are usually my highest toxic load kids. Heavy metals, mold, environmental toxins.
Let's dig into this a little bit more because I feel like this is no pun intended, this is heavy stuff that we need to get into. So when you say toxins in the food and toxins in the environment that are getting into our kids, be it just from being outside, living in the homes they're living in, or the food that's on their plates, can you elaborate a little bit?
So we have industrialized so much, over the last couple of decades where we just have more, we have more like if you I was actually talking to my dad about this, cuz he remembers not having a refrigerator as a kid. Having a refrigerator came later in life because, it was new. So people didn't have things to keep things cold. There were no packaged foods. You went out and you bought your food every 2, 3 days. You went to the food store, you didn't have an exuberant amount of food to eat or things that you could, take out of the pantry and cook like we do now, the convenience factor. So depending on your location right now, some of like we have a lot of toxins in our food, which is why we really try to avoid ultra processed foods, especially in children early on, because we know that ultra processed foods, the one thing that I really wish I could go back and shake myself is like, do not give like Cheez-Its and goldfish and stuff to a child like early on because it's just loaded with just bad ingredients, toxins, and, it disrupts their microbiome. You have a child who has a developing brain and a developing microbiome. Research has shown that these ultra processed foods, which kids are now eating up to 65 to 70% of their daily intake of ultra processed food, is damaging their microbiome. It's altering their gut.
How did that happen?
Convenience factor. I mean, if you think about how many moms and dads both have to work now versus just only dads worked at one time and moms got to stay home and cook and do all these different things. Now you have parents having to work 40, 50, 60 hours of work to just maintain a home and pay for childcare, and it's a convenience factor. Oh, you're crying? Here's some Cheez-Its. Oh, Are you hungry? Okay, do you want, it's about 85% of kids don't eat enough fruit, and almost 90 to 95% of kids don't eat enough vegetables either. So we have our whole entire process of food consumption for children has drastically altered and shifted significantly.
And lately, there's been everybody keeps talking about this, food in terms of food regulation and the foods that we're eating. The grass loophole seems to be sort of the hot topic,
Yeah.
that everybody's talking about. I feel as if people are getting mad because of who is saying it rather than necessarily understand why it's being said. So, in terms of food regulation, how does our country, and I'll take a moment to explain the grass loophole in a second. If you look at a place like France or UK or anywhere in the EU, but developed countries, I'm not necessarily talking about lesser developed countries. How does our food here compare to there? How does it look?
So different. There was actually a really cool, I want to say it was like these pictures that were going around on the internet where they were comparing school lunches of kids from all across the world. And it was just so different in so many different ways. I mean, if you, we, it was like the kids that, in the United States had like pizza, milk, apple, it was like, it was just like the cheapest of cheap of meals. And then you look at like France and UK and China, and they had these amazing, delicious, elaborate, real food, real cooked meals for their lunch, which I understand is a big difference because of the population difference. I mean, kids at school, the, percentage of like, each tray has to be a certain amount of money, so you have to be able to create that tray of food under, $3.50, and that's where, you know, what food are you going to get that you can make for that amount of money that cheaply and put it on a plate for a kid, so I don't think we take our nutrition and how we feed our children very seriously anymore in the United States, whether it be on an education basis. I mean, I got into a fight with my son's school because they were serving Pop Tarts for breakfast. And I was like, this is not a breakfast.
That will be here long after nuclear winter. Yeah. So
I'm like, can we figure out something else for breakfast? Like, an apple popover and a donut, that was a breakfast meal. And I'm like, these are, and then we wonder why these kids are crazy during school. They have sugar highs, sugar lows. And, I understand that a lot of people are working within budgets and stuff, but I mean, I feel like we should be trying to do better for them.
I feel like the way society has evolved and the way technology has evolved. I mean, the average smartphone nowadays produces more information every 2 days than the president of the United States had in totality in the year 2000. I think Eric Schmidt said that in 2010. So God knows it's probably more by now at this point. So
Yeah.
if we can solve problem, if a car can drive itself and make decisions on whether or not to turn left and right, we should be able to make healthier food choices for our kids. So I feel like I actually we just brought up the differences between European foods and the foods in the US, but I actually want to just take a moment and address a little bit about the difference in the regulations on the foods in Europe and US. So in Europe, if you want to put a chemical in food, you have to submit that chemical to the government with a full safety profile, just like I have to do for a drug or a medical device. And I don't mind doing that because I think people deserve safe medicine. That seems to be a fundamental right. And the European governments have to approve that chemical to be put into food. So it is a ask for permission, not forgiveness mentality. Now in the US, I'm actually just going to get a little bit historical for a second. So, bear with me. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that is still considered sort of the overarching constitution of the way that we're regulating food, drugs, and cosmetics, was written in 1938. And it was written in response to a catastrophe, right around that time. I think about 100 adults and children died from a drug-related, ingestion situation with a bad drug. And it was, we need to regulate these things. We need to regulate food and drugs. Very well-intentioned, piece of legislation that was put through. And it's still in place to this day. And foods were obviously very different in 1938. These are things that like grandma cooked with. These are the ingredients she was using were vinegar and salt and butter and, milk. And they weren't, engineered by computers. They were engineered by nature and grandma. So in the post-war era, right after about World War II, I would say, there was this big boom in the processed food industry. And because of that, and Congress and the agencies started saying, look, we're seeing so many new chemicals, we need to put some kind of a piece of legislation in place to regulate these things. And again, with good intentions, they passed the Food Additives Amendment. It was an addition to this act in 1958. Now, in 1958, they grandfathered in the baking sodas, the butters, the things that were already generally recognized as safe. That is what GRAS stands for, generally recognized as safe. And it opened up what I would call a loophole by grandfathering those ingredients in, because it created the opportunity for an argument to be made that, look, we have this new chemical. It's just as safe as butter. It's just as safe as salt. It's just as safe as vinegar. I'm going to file a petition, or I'm going to do enough studies and put them in my own file cabinet. I'm going to put this ingredient out because nobody should be able to tell me it's not recognized as safe. My own scientists, the people that I pay, say it is. And that started to get really abused, until ultimately in 1990, the formal acceptance of the self-affirmation of generally regarded as safe just sort of was adopted. It became a whole laissez-faire approach to what ingredients you put into food, which means if I have a food company and I want to put some synthetic polymer in there that's going to make, my Twinkie last 40 years, I can hire my own scientist or my own consultants. I can pay him or her. We can generate our own toxicology profiles, our own risk profiles. We could put them in a file folder, and here's the best part. We can actually call it confidential. And we can leave it in the back of the office, and we can put that ingredient in our food because we are self-affirming or self-declaring that that ingredient is safe. So you don't even have a notification requirement at this point in history. Now, in 97, they tried to do a little bit better. They created what they called the voluntary GRAS notification system, and the key word is voluntary. This was not an enforceable thing. So you get like a gold star and a participation award, if you notify the FDA that you're putting in this new chemical. But that was the last time they actually made an addition to that act. So right now, Health and Human Services is trying to attempt to close that loop, and I commend them for it. It's a huge process. They're running exploratory, studies on how hard it would be to close that loop. But with modern technology that we have right now, with things like artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, that it's like having, a $3 trillion computer infrastructure in my pocket that I can ask questions anytime I want. Do you feel like there's any excuse why we can't be reviewing, the safety of these ingredients, even retrospectively, even confidentially, via some kind of a portal that these companies can submit? Do you feel like with what we have now in terms of technology, we could do better?
This is very similar to like the toxins that they did, with 3M, with PFAS, this when they when they were like, oh, we know now that this PFAS causes cancer, causes birth defects, we'll just alter the chemical reaction a little bit. Now it's PFAS, not PFAS. Now it's PFOs, so they keep altering chemicals to say, oh, well, it's different, but it's better. It's fine, and we keep doing that with other things. It's a catch-22, and it's tough because we want more regulations. We want safer food. We want cleaner food. We want if you just, what's crazy is I looked at the back of a pickle jar and it has polysorbate 80 in it.
Is that even allowed in Europe, by the way? Hasn't that been banned?
I'm not 100% sure.
I think it was banned. Yeah, okay.
I think it probably was. But for me, I was like looking, going, why is there polysorbate 80 in food coloring and food dyes and pickles? Why are we, I used to work on a farm when I was a kid. No joke. I swear to God. I used to work on a farm, and one of my jobs was to take the raw peanuts and put them in the machine and make peanut butter. And that's what I did. And I always thought that that was how peanut butter was made, is just doing that. And then when I went and looked at the ingredients in peanut butter, I'm like, why are all these extra things that are in there when you could just grind peanuts and make peanut butter? Like, it wasn't anything crazy. So I feel like we could do better as a society and as a system. I feel, even though it sounds trivial where people go, oh, right now we're trying to get food dyes out of food and stuff. And it sounds trivial. And it does to a certain degree. However, we have to start somewhere. There has to be a starting point to make change. And if we can make this one change, especially for children, I mean, I don't think people understand how much food dyes are actually in things that kids are getting. And if we're just thinking about, free, we have a lot of people in the United States that need free meals, kids needing free breakfast, free lunches. And what's served a lot of the times? Well, Pop-Tarts, cereal, packaged foods. So if we could get this one thing, and if we can alter and change and get food dyes out of this thing across the board, in the United States, I mean, I think it was I wanna say when I looked up the statistic a really long time ago, it was, like, over, like, 50 to some odd percent of kids actually still consume cereal for breakfast. So if especially in schools. So if we can get them to change this one thing, we're hoping it's gonna have a trickle-down effect. Now, again, dyes don't affect everybody, but I know that it affects my children. I know friends and families and patients that it affects. So this one change can trickle down and start making a change overall so that we can go, okay, here was step 1, here's step 2, and so on and so forth. So for me, it's a starting point. It's a way to get in the door to start making change and make manufacturers go, you know what? Moving forward, now we all have to be compliant. Now we can't sneak in and just keep adding things that don't need to be there.
It also creates a little bit of a situation where you don't know what they're going to try and pull next. It creates that, and actually that's a good thing. I mean, because it forces you to proactively think like, I know this is unsafe. They may figure it out soon, or they may identify it soon, and they may make me pull it out. So I'm seeing a little bit more reformulating and sort of, companies doing announcements about taking X, Y, or Z out of foods. I agree with you on there has to be a step. And I think I said on my last episode that I get asked a lot about my politics, and I steer clear of those answers, to be honest, because I don't know any of my neighbors vote, and we still all get along, and I love that. Um, but I can still be happy that people are having conversations. I wish the conversations were more, respectful disagreement sometimes than, stone throwing. But at least we're talking about it. So I don't disagree that anything is better than nothing right now. And I don't care who's doing it. I'm just happy that somebody is starting. So I couldn't agree with you more.
It's a hard thing because people are very passionate about certain things, especially politics, religion, their children. So when you bring in children to the mix, it could go either way. And that's one thing where we have to have these. I try to talk about a lot of different things on my platforms and think, because especially when it comes to autism, good, bad, or indifferent. Because if we don't talk about them, I did a post for Autism Awareness Month with a lot of statistics, with things that I didn't even realize. There was a lot of support and a lot of parents going, wow, like, because the burnout rate for autism parents was like over 65%. Depression rates were 70%. It was just like, a parent is 56 or 60% grieve. It was all these statistics where some parents were like, oh my gosh, like, this makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm not alone right now. And then other parents are like, well, why are you bringing this up? This makes me more depressed. It's like, well, because there were people that came on also that were like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that parents suffered this much." So we need to have these open and honest conversations, whether it be autism, ADHD, interventions, research and food, everything. We have to have these conversations because this is how we evolve as society. This is where hypothesis comes into play. If we stay silent and we don't have these communications, this is where everybody else is able to take over for us and we don't get a voice anymore and we need to keep our voices.
That was an amazing way to put that. So I want to go back to when your son was diagnosed. Did the pediatrician mention anything about, his gut, the environmental toxins? I mean, was it just, he has autism, we'll write a prescription, go get, here's the alphabet soup of agencies that can help you, the occupational therapists, the ABAs, the speech therapists? Because that was our experience until we met you.
My son's first developmental pediatrician appointment was when he was about 3 years old. I was just about 7 weeks pregnant at that time with my second when we were getting his official diagnosis from the developmental pediatrician, which we had to wait about 6-7 months for to get into. And I didn't like her at all. I didn't like how she spoke to us. I didn't like, the assessment. I just wasn't happy. And I remember she turned around and she was like, well, you better get him genetically tested just in case you pass this on to the next child. And I'm like, I'm 7 weeks pregnant. And I just start bawling.
Yeah, that's not such good bedside manner on that one. Yeah.
So I remember my husband and I we looked at each other when we got in the car. We were like, well, that was a waste of 6 months. It was just, so I made a different developmental pediatrician appointment. I think I only waited about 3 or 4 months at that time. They must have had a cancellation. So I went and I saw them and they were so much better. And I remember after the evaluation, as I was leaving, she's like, oh, I forgot to tell you, you could put them on fish oil because that's really the only research that has actually shown to actually help kids with autism. And I was like, what? So that's where it kind of started. That kind of was like what do you mean? So it was interesting because we had gotten into a little bit of a spat with Miralax, and I told her I wasn't putting him on Miralax, and because I did for like a week or two, and it made him really, it was making him sick. Like it was a disaster. But then she mentioned the fish oils, and I was intrigued, and it was interesting. So that's where I went down the rabbit hole. And that was how I started with Keegan. I went back to her a year later. So Keegan was about a little over 5. And he was like, he was talking in full sentences. Everything was different. And I remember talking to her and I said, oh, I started doing these supplements and these tests and stuff like that. And she looked at me. She's like, none of that works. It's all fake. And I looked at her and I was like, proof, pudding. I said, what are you I said, lady, we met you a year ago and he wasn't doing anything. And now he's able to do a test. She gave him paper and pen and he had to draw and copy and he was doing all the things. And I'm sitting there she's just so dismissive of everything we had done. And I said, but this is what happened. This was what his gut looked like. This is the supplements. I started detoxing him. And she was just like, none of that's proven to work. And I was just like, 6 weeks. You want to see the video? To me, I was just kind of like, I think that was a huge turning point for me about opening up my own practice and really becoming, it's very interesting. When I was writing, you have to write a paper for applications for your master's program. And there was always this quote that stuck with me. And believe it or not, it was from Snoop Dogg. And it said, find something you are good at and learn to be great at it.
Great quote. And I'm a big fan of Snoop.
Yeah. I wrote that in my application and I got in, which I thought was funny. I didn't use his name, Snoop Dogg. I used his real name. So no one, but it was kind of one of those things for me. It was a turning point. And I was like, I was pissed. I was mad. I was like, I just spent a lot of money, a lot of time, I literally poured so much into this where I just got him within 6 weeks. Now, a year later, he's doing incredible. And you're going to just be like, no. I said, that's it. I'm going to learn to be the expert here because you are a developmental pediatrician. You have gone, you're supposed to be up here. You are supposed to know everything. You are supposed to be the person that says, oh, you can look into this. You can look into that. There's some for me, it was kind of like, now with chat GBT, medical AI and stuff, there should be zero excuses, zero, for you to not know something, be able to look up something, research something. I still have pediatricians that don't believe pans and pandas is the thing for kids. So there is no more excuses in today's society where now you're just lazy and you don't want to learn. And that's how I felt, because I said, if I'm finding this research, it's at my fingertips. If I'm finding this, you're the medical professional. How are you not finding this research? How is that possible?
I had the same experience when I started actually taking my products out in my company, and I came up with this quote that I feel like is going to be on my tombstone someday because I say it so often. It is, routine is the enemy of progress. People just get stuck in their ways, and this is the answer. If you don't like it, CA. And
Yeah.
as far as what you took Keegan through, so you say you started him down this protocol. I think this is sort of what you probably similar to what Luca went through. So you run tests, you do gut tests, you do metal tests. So can you take us through?
Oh, I did them all.
Yeah. So
I did them all.
so Keegan was also like your lab rat, is what they say. Keegan was your lab rat. Got it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. If there was a test, I was doing it. And you and I talked about this. I like data, and data is your friend. I love data so much that to me, it was the more information I had, the more puzzle pieces I could put together. So when I first started, when he was about 4.5, I met with a functional provider who helped me run a bunch of tests to get me started. And that's what opened up. So we did some blood work. We looked at, inflammation, food sensitivities, food allergies, gut testing, organic acids, toxin testing. I did Lyme. I did neurotransmitters. I literally did the gamut. And I was able to say, okay, here's where we are right now at this age. Now we're going to go. Okay. So I've learned over the years, I left working in healthcare and went and worked actually for a functional lab company because I wanted to get so good at interpreting functional lab testing because that was my goal.
That's never.
Yeah. Because to me, the labs were everything. The labs told me about that person's body and system, and now I can work backwards. So your end result is always a diagnosis and a disease. Now work backwards to find the starting point, and you can fix working back going forward again. So that's how I started creating the system, because I think just from my nutrition background, my functional lab background, like all this, I was able to kind of look at the human body and a growing system. And once I started really understanding more about the development of the pediatric microbiome, the immune system, brain development, that's why it's so important. Depending on where that child is at age and status will determine what testing and where we need to be and where we're going. So with Keegan, it's just everything, I had to start learning how to sculpture each individual child with their protocol, with their labs, in order to put everything together for that individual person. And something I would like to make sure that, I don't ever think that there's just one, autism is to me a 3-ring concept. You have genetics in the middle, you have metabolic on one end and environment on the other end, and they're all connected 3 rings. So there's always what I feel is like 2 types of autism. You have genetic autism. There was something that happened in utero, there was something that happened genetically, and, this is where we have autism is genetic. But then we have this other concept with the metabolic and environmental that can be damaging, that can cause issues with the brain, causing autism-like symptoms or what we consider as autism. Both, I think, can be helped. Okay, whether I have kids that have genetic abnormalities, and we still do interventions for them. And then I have kids who were toxic load burdened and were impacted. Both, you can have stuff, you could do stuff for them. It's not like this is, but I don't use like cure, reverse, I don't like to use those in my practice just because of the mere fact that, one, I still have a child who's on the spectrum and I want to respect those in that community because that my child is a part of that community, and I don't want him to ever think I was trying to cure him because that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make him as happy and as healthy as I possibly can, which is why I usually tell all of my families that is our ultimate goal. Because we really don't know. These testings give us so much information. They really do. But it's not anything different than if I could cut you open and look inside your head, I'd get way more information, but I can't do that. So,
You mentioned
mm.
research that you dug into and you went down the rabbit hole about all the inflammation and, other
A
articles.
lot, yeah.
So you're saying there's legit, data out there showing that this is a real thing. This isn't just, the crunchy, you know, try anything, burn the incense and hope that everything gets better science. Like there's data backing.
Yeah. Each section has tons of data. Like if you just look at, like if you go to PubMed and you write gut microbiome and autism, there's almost like 1,000 studies that have been done in just like last like 10 years. And then if you go to autism and heavy metals, there's, more studies there, so each section might have, it's, if you just type in autism, you're going to get so many different things. So, but yeah, there are what we call CAM, complementary alternative medicine, which is what I wrote a research study on sulforaphane treatment for autism spectrum disorder. There's tons of, research on alternative medicine, alternative herbals, and doing different things. So there, the whole purpose in the biomed community that I love, like, with Dr. Fry and things like, and people like him, is we're trying to always push and can put this research out there because that's what's important, because this is how we continue. Who's going to fund us? Who's going to spend the money to fund? But if we can do our own research and publish it, it actually solidifies that this is what we call evidence-based medicine. So, if your kid has an ear infection, you go to the doctor, the standard practice of care is to do antibiotics. Is that the only thing you can do? No, you can go to chiropractor, you can do meal and garlic ear drops, colloidal silver, essential oils. Like you could do other things too. It's not just antibiotics, but that's the standard practice of care. So, but if we're able to continue to publish this research and make it more of a standard practice of care, and call it, and this is evidence-based medicine. We're showing the evidence through the cycle. This is where we are able to change the future for other practitioners and other parents in the future to go, hey, look, I've had now more pediatricians actually order leucovorin for patients than ever before just because of Dr. Fry's work and his publications.
That's fulfilling. That's got to make you feel good. When you see that.
Yeah. It's kind of like, finally, it's coming together. So that's why we do it. Like that's the premise of what we're trying to do when we're doing publications in this area.
You were talking about the two different types of autism, and it's almost like you've gotten in my brain via osmosis because I've read so much of your stuff. I started actually referring to it as inflammatory autism, almost as a reflex. There are some kids that you can tell earlier, that they're going to have the traditional autism. It's just very apparent. And they're on their journey, and then there are other kids that it's sort of a surprise, sort of like what you and I went through. And yes, they both can be helped, and the help and the approaches should be tailored, per the child, as you say. I mean, they treat the human, not the pop, in these situations. If there's inflammation going on, if I have a swollen ankle and I take an Advil and the inflammation goes down, although I can't take Advil because my stomach gets mad at me, the ankle gets better. If we've got inflammation in the gut, I mean, my son had blood in his stool. That scared the daylights out of me when I saw that. I called my dad, who's a cardiologist. He was freaking out too. He's like, go get it rechecked, make sure that, there's not some mistake in the lab. It was high. And by the time, we were 6 months into a protocol with you, it was back down to, 0. But
Yeah.
that is an undeniable marker that his gut was screaming, but he didn't know it. He was still smiling. That was just his state of normal. was uncomfortable. And you know what?
Kids are resilient.
Yeah. And then they end up picky eaters because their stomach hurts. And we wonder why they find the few foods that their stomach, doesn't get upset about. They stick to those things. Then it just becomes an adaptive mechanism. I think one of the first things I noticed was when the inflammation started going down is he was more open to trying new foods. Have you seen that a lot?
Yeah. So inflammation, we have the gut brain connection, and inflammation can be right in the gut from food, for Keegan. And I'll just talk about Keegan because, is the easiest sometimes. But I didn't realize how much gluten it wasn't that he had celiac disease. But when I tested his stool, his gluten marker was off the charts. When I tested his wheat zoomer, gluten was off the charts. When I tested his genetic markers, he carries the genetic marker for 90 to 95% will develop celiac disease, this kid. Okay. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, and guess what he craved all the time? Gluten. The body also craves the things that make it the worst sometimes too, because it doesn't know no different than kids who have maybe cerebral folate deficiency and crave milk and all they want is dairy. So once I removed gluten, I remember it was like 6 months later and I was like, "Oh my god, he hasn't thrown up in the middle of the night." Usually that kid would throw up a couple times a month in the middle of the night because of something too much gluten or, brain fog, couldn't sit still, like agitated, wouldn't eat, would barely try anything. It was like a whole different kid a year later. I'm like, "Oh, hey, you try this?" "Yeah, I'll try it. I'll eat that." Like, I'm like, "Okay, who are you? Where did you come from?" So when you have inflammation and kids are just resilient. I mean, I've had kids literally in front of me that were so anemic and still like running around in circles. And I'm like, how are you not like on a bed, just like so lethargic because you're so anemic? Kids are just so resilient. They don't know any better. I've had kids that have been in pain for months and the parents didn't even know that they were in pain. And then once we started working, it was like, they're our child's like a whole different kid right now. And you could tell that, whatever pain or whatever was going on, they're fine now. Like they're better. So sometimes it's that gut brain connection. Is it the food? Is it the gut? Is it, microbe overgrowth? Is it yeast overgrowth? Like what is causing all this inflammation and then inflaming the brain? And then you have a kid that's this is why I call it rebalancing the spectrum, is because they're so imbalanced that their bodies don't know if I should go forward, backwards, right, left, like where do I go? And they just kind of freeze and they go, I'll just stay here until someone tells me what to do.
There is a little bit of a blame game going on right now. Like this causes it, that causes it, this causes it, that causes it. There's also something to be said for, and the Bill Maher has this documentary called Religulous. And I'm a big fan of Bill Maher. I think he's super funny. I don't know if you've seen that. And at the end, he says, I just live in that humble space of, I don't know what happens to me after I die. And like, it's okay to say, I don't know sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
I love not knowing stuff. It means I get to learn something. Nobody knows definitively what quote unquote causes autism. Nobody knows definitively, this kid versus that kid, what happened to this kid versus that kid. We are pretty certain there's a genetic component. There's probably a genetic predisposition. I think Greer may, agree with me on that subject, but disagree if you don't.
So here's the thing. With the information and research that we had, if we're looking back at the 1950s, 60s, 70s, etc., the research we had pointed because autism was so rare that it was a genetic abnormality. Okay. And we were also looking at people who had profound autism who needed to be institutionalized majority of the time. And I actually happened to, when I worked in healthcare, I was responsible for a lot of individuals who were unfortunately chained to radiators and had straight jackets and were enclosed, and they could actually explain that and tell me about that, which was pretty intense for me as a person. But that was what we did back in that time. And when we look at the research, we also were like, oh, it was very similar to Down syndrome. We just assumed it was just a genetic abnormality, which rightfully so, it probably was to a certain degree for majority of them. Then if you look at the 60s and 70s, we started to notice a lot of an increase. And a lot of that actually had to do with like lead poisoning. So if we're looking at, what can happen with toxins, let's just take lead, for instance. On a 2022 published research study, because of the exposure of lead in gasoline and other areas, 824 million IQ points were lost in the US population. Okay. That's just looking at lead. And we did have a lot of lead in gasoline. We had lead paint. We had a big problem. But if we're quantifying that, and that's just during that one period of time, and that was with lead. And now look at the amount of chemicals we have today. Look at the amount of heavy metals that we have today in our food and in our products and things like that. Even like your stainless steel water bottle has nickel in it. So a lot of my kiddos who have gut issues with like H. pylori, I had to tell them to stop drinking out of stainless steel water bottles for a while we treat it, because the nickel feeds H. pylori. But we don't think about these things because we're like, oh, stainless steel, it's better for us. But it can be a problem in certain aspects too. So this is where we have to take a consideration of everything and say, okay, can autism be genetic? Yes, it could be. There could be a component of it could be a genetic abnormality or a de novo, or you don't detox well. Like Keegan's genetics are very different than me, my husband, and my youngest son. He's the outlier. My kid with autism is the outlier. He has worse genetic SNPs than the three of us. He doesn't detox well. He doesn't methylate well. He doesn't convert and use choline well. He has all these different issues that make it more difficult for him, for his body to function. So could it be an accumulation? Could it be, who knows? But I think what we need to stop saying is, okay, if we keep just blaming genetics, we're not going to get anywhere in life, because, and it's interesting because people have said to me, oh, it means that you or your husband have autism. I'm like, we don't. I might have ADHD, but I don't have autism. My husband, we have no autism in our family. So, we can't keep using this as an excuse for other things that we already know. If we know lead poisoning can cause developmental disabilities, speech delay, cognitive impairment, speech impairment, and things like that, if we know that about lead, why can't it be other things and more in accumulation that can also damage the brain and cause these things too?
We've talked about the food now, in the comparison between European countries and the US. Now, I got curious and I looked at autism rates between developed European countries and the US. And I looked at France, for example. France has had relatively aggressive, chemical bans in terms of things that they know to be unsafe. They've been really on top of that, and go France for that. But the other thing I noticed is that the number of people that were on their registry or diagnosed formally as autism, this is socialized medicine. They obviously have an account for people. This is, people have free health care, so people are going to the doctor. It's 1 in 31 here, but it was 1 in 144 there.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to believe that they just don't know how to diagnose, and we do. So do you think there's any connection between what they have in their foods, what they have in their environment, the way they're regulating, and the rates there?
Every country is going to be somewhat different in just looking at so many different things. And if you're looking at developing countries, they're a little bit more ahead in certain things. Even, in the UK, they ban a lot more products than we do. So for me, when I look at everything as a whole, majority, like if I look, believe it or not, if you can look at statistics and percentage of people who find you on Instagram and where they are from all over the world, my highest rates are usually from the United States and India. The lower rates of people who are looking for biomedical interventions are things like your UK, Italy, France, etc. They just don't have the need that we do and places like India do. India is one of the harder places to even get a diagnosis for, versus other developing countries. So it's pretty crazy to watch that change and see that different types of transitioning of just who needs help, who gets more resources. I mean, I've met people from France, I've met people from the UK, I've met people from Italy, and they have some pretty stellar interventions and support systems there. Their autism rate is so much lower than many other areas. They don't need, they trickle in, I don't, in the United States, it's like I can't keep up. Like I need to clone myself to be able to help more people because it's just so many kids.
And I mean, that's a depressing statement, but also I'm happy you're there if you think about it. I can't keep up with the number of people who need my help. I mean, it was recently called an epidemic. What do you think of the use of that word?
I think we kind of are. If and we're not saying it to be mean, and we're not saying it to put down autism in general. But what I think people don't understand is right now there is a wait list of over a year for most places just to get a diagnosis and just to get therapies. Some places have 2-year wait lists. So we are in a crisis of where there are so many kids. I mean, I had to wait, and this was 8 years ago, 6 months to get an appointment. Now it's a year where I live, and in other areas, 2 years. So now we have so many kids who need services, need a diagnosis, need support, and they have to wait a year or more to get it. If that is not an epidemic of crisis, I don't know what is. And these are kids who need help now, not in a year from now when they're going to be completely different and they don't get the support they need.
So I started this episode and I knew this is a hot topic going in, but I also know it's personal enough that I frankly don't care. Like, this needs to be talked about. This information needs to be out there. You shouldn't have to dig the way you did and face the steers and that doesn't work from sort of the old medical guard, like you did. And frankly, we face, I would say, not quite as intense as that, but we certainly didn't get any suggestions, like you gave us. Where do we go from here? I feel like we have a food safety system that needs to evolve with the times, but I feel like that's a bit of a process. I mean, that has to go through Congress. The FDA doesn't have total authority to just take away the self-declaration of safety, off the bat. They're doing what they can at the moment, and I commend them for it. But now, where do we go from here? What can parents do? What can parents read? Where can parents go to find information? And how can we make them feel less alone and give them that sigh of relief that we got, that there may be, hope on the horizon?
Yeah, for sure. So I usually try to tell my parents, like, let's start with one step. Like, let's start with making one change or looking into something. And it's very overwhelming and everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to start at different speeds and different journeys. So that's why I created my care pack, which is like free ebooks for my families. And that's just to kind of help them start putting action steps forward. Okay, you don't know what to do? No problem. Grab the care pack on my website. It's completely free. And one of the first things I have is a workbook in there. And the workbook kind of starts explaining what biomedical interventions are, what we're looking for, and why. Okay. And then we're going to go, okay, if we're going to have to start with something, let's start with here. And then, you can trickle down from there. But it's kind of giving you a checklist of small, digestible steps to start making a difference. Because as well as I do, you can get bogged down really quick, getting too big into the research. And I mean, I've spent months on something and chasing a ghost that didn't have anything to do with my son's medical intervention. So I try to really narrow that down. So it helps you find somebody, a practitioner or someone to work with to figure out what is needed, what do you need to do, what are first steps, testing, and then helping you just kind of put action steps into place. And that's where, that was the hardest thing for me was what do I do first? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do first. Like, what's the first step? And that's where I help parents. We sit down, we go over your child's history, we figure out what's going on, and then we do the testing then we follow up with a plan based on the labs. So really for everybody, their journey is going to look very different, but at least we can start our steps in the right direction of just here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Let's just start the process. And you know what? Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm not expecting my patients to go gluten-free and dairy-free in a week and get rid of all their toxic living stuff. And, it's a hard thing to ask. So we start very small and we build out. What are actionable steps that you need to do now first before even going into step number 2? Okay. So again, but that's important because we're parents, we get bogged down. You ask a question on Facebook, you're going to get 40 different answers.
I've said that many times about research. The interesting thing and the terrible thing about the internet is no matter what your opinion is, you could always find somebody who agrees with you. Yeah. So no matter how weird it is, there's always going to be somebody who agrees exactly with you. And what I think, I don't mind saying this, that I wish people would stop doing is cover up your eyes and don't look at who's saying what at the moment. If there are people out there that are attempting to do good, who cares who it is? Who cares what your voter registration is? Who cares what party they were from? Who cares, what person they're friends with? Like, if somebody is trying to help children, just be happy they're doing it, and the definition of bias in research is essentially saying, I'm not going to agree with this because of who said it. I cannot think of a more biased statement than actually not agreeing with the message because you don't like the messenger. And I've gotten into disagreements about that recently. Like, that person is not going to say anything true. We all know what he's like. Well, let's wait and hear what he says or she says before we come to that opinion.
It's very interesting because you have one side that loves to criticize research in this area. And then if we criticize research in their area, we just get called names. We just get called, fake internet doctors and things like that. And it's like, well, why are you able to criticize our research? And then when we criticize your research that we have valid points for, why is that seen as a negative? Why is that seen as bad? That's what I don't quite understand. And I've seen that a lot with a couple research studies that just came out where we asked a lot of questions like this research study left out this type of group. They do something different than we do in the United States. Like, we're using this to compare, but we can't compare. So how are we using this as research to compare? And we can't. Why can't we criticize the research that is blatantly not really great and accurate, but then we get looked at as like crazy? I just think it's very interesting. Research is supposed to be scrutinized and criticized. It's supposed to be. That's the whole premise.
I'm defended a thesis too, ironically, on ADHD. We should talk about that sometime in another episode. Like, my entire master's thesis was about possible environmental determinants for attention deficit disorder. But your friends are supposed to, your peers are supposed to poke holes in your research to make sure it's good. Like, if you're the author of a paper, you want somebody to find a hole in it. It's like if you're the author of a patent, you actually hire attorneys to say, how is somebody going to get around this? How is somebody going to copy it? How is somebody going to, file a petition to get it invalidated? So research is supposed to be criticized. I couldn't agree more. And I think that knowledge is built upon the shoulders of other knowledge. And the name of the author or the person arguing the opinion should have nothing to do with the conclusion as long as the study is done properly. So I agree with that. So I think that my request for everybody out there is that we continue having these conversations. We try to do it more respectfully of each other. We don't necessarily say my guy or my girl is smarter than your guy or your girl. We just look at the data, we look at the numbers, we look at the experiences, we listen to the people like Greer, or me in this situation, who has seen actual change from what are actually called alternative methods. Maybe someday they won't have to be called alternative. Maybe they'll just be methods. That's a nice dream. And we got to get the word out more. This needs to be shared. People need to download your ebook. People need to take a look at just actionable first steps. They need to go to PubMed, type in the words autism and inflammation and look at the hundreds of articles that are out there. And this is not just me and you talking about something that is fringe science. Like, there's real science out there. And also, and I can say this, it's nice to not feel lonely, in these situations, to have conversations with people. And getting on this show now and saying it out loud, and who knows how many people will listen to it, it's rather liberating. So if you're in denial the way I was, if you're in denial the way Greer was in the beginning, if you're just shaking your head and saying, why did this happen to me, or my kid's going to be fine, but deep down there could be something you could do, go to the website and read the ebook, go to PubMed, look at the research, find a group near you looking into the same things. Ask your pediatrician. Maybe you'll get a better answer than we got about the gut-brain connection. Maybe there's even a holistic, pediatrician near you. There's all sorts of, practices that now seem to look at not just the standard, do this, do that. So subscribe, join the show, go to Greer's website. Her Instagram, by the way, is going to make you cry. I'm just warning everybody ahead of time, grab the tissues before you go to Greer's Instagram. Your Instagram handle's probably on the screen, but what is it again?
Biomedical healing for kids. Just biomedical healing for kids.
Now, that is, you want to feel inspired and feel some hope, go to Greer's Instagram. I mean, that is something you should watch before you go to bed. And thank you. And Greer, I'm appreciative of you as sort of a member of the family now, because you're helping my son, which makes you family. But I'm also grateful that you came on the show today. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys. I really do.
Click subscribe now. We're on all the available podcast platforms, and check out all of Greer's information in the show description.